Thanks again for such a great response by everybody across Middle East, and we've even got responses from us as far as Australia. So thanks everybody for joining. Uh, Over to you, Prem, to begin.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are currently based. First and foremost, let me extend a very, very warm welcome to everybody who is there in the audience today. We are at a very interesting point in the history of cybersecurity. All of us who are involved with cybersecurity in some aspect or the other. But one of the things that all of us would agree is that it's an extremely complex space. And therefore, I can understand when you are flooded with requests for attending webinars, requests for attending events, and your own challenges with threats and different risks and different applications, you will always be wondering, where should I spend my time? We are therefore extremely grateful to you for having agreed to attend this webinar. And let me at the very outset assure you that each and every one of you, irrespective of which part of the journey of zero trust you are on, you may be just assessing your requirements today, you might be evaluating alternatives, or you might be about to take a decision. Let me assure you that you will definitely leave this session today with something useful, something to think about, something that will enable you to take the right next steps. So with that, let me also introduce quickly the panel to you. But before I introduce the panel to you, I want to introduce myself. I'm the CEO. I work as the CEO of Paramount. And James Stallfree is the VP Sales of Appgate. Looking at us two sitting in this panel of illustrious people and the audience that is there in front of us, I am reminded of what Winston Churchill once said. He said, never try to climb a wall that is leaning towards you. Never try to kiss a girl who is leaning away from you. And never try to speak to an audience that knows more about the subject than you do. So James and I will remain as quiet as we can. And we will leave it to Jason, Rajesh, and Amit, who together bring in about 85 man-years of IT industry experience. And they will tell us about the product. Jason has got extensive experience talking to Gartner, Forrester, the Cloud Security Alliance, and he's been with this whole concept of zero trust for several years now. And he's an independent consultant today, and he will tell us as to where this whole zero trust stands today in the world market. Rajesh is also an independent consultant today, but he was working with a customer who implemented probably one of the first large family houses to implement zero trust, moving away from a standard VPN and having secure access to assets which are both on-prem as well as in the cloud. And Rajesh will share with us his own experience with implementation and the reason why he is today such a votary of this whole concept of zero trust. Amit is our head of infrastructure security in Paramount, and he also runs a company in Nepal with about 15, 20 people supporting various customers in the world. And he has had multiple interactions with customers. We today have about, I think, 8 customers who have implemented zero trust. And Amit has been involved with in-depth discussions both before implementation and after implementation. And he can share with you his experience as to what are the prerequisites. What should you take care of before you actually touch a tool? Now, this is a very important aspect in this region because very often we find customers buying a tool before having done the prerequisites. And then you start doing the prerequisites. And what happens is that either you're not happy or it takes too long a time to complete the implementation and show the board that there is some benefit of that investment that you have made. I want to put a little bit of the background in perspective for you before I hand it over to Jason. Jack Welch once said that if the rate of change outside your organization is greater than the rate of change inside your organization is in trouble. I think this is a very important statement, and it has a lot of relevance with this whole technologies that we've been using or methodologies that we've been using for remote access. Let me give you a background. In the year 99-2000, that was the time when this region started with using the internet. And that is when firewalls started coming in, and the firewalls had IPsec VPN built in. And we had very few remote users, but the remote users all used IPsec. It was in the year 2002 that I had the good fortune of visiting San Francisco and attending the RSC conference. And there I happened to meet a person named Kitu, who was the CEO of a company called Neoterus. And he told me that we are in the business of SSL VPN. So I asked him, what is this SSL VPN all about? So he said, let me make it very simple for you. Today, all customers use IPsec VPN for remote access. Now, when you use IPsec VPN, you have to put an agent on the laptop. And the moment you put an agent on the laptop, managing that becomes a headache. So in SSL VPN, there is no agent on the laptop. I felt that it was a very simple, easy to understand, valuable for customers. And we signed up with this company called Neoterus. And we brought SSL VPN to this market in 2002. There was not a single company using SSL VPN. It took us some time to convince customers. Saudi Telecom Company was the first company to implement SSL VPN in a very big way in 2003. And since then, most customers have continued to use IPsec VPN and SSL VPN. Now look at the situation in today's time frame. In the past, we had all our assets on-prem. Today, we have assets which are distributed, some on-prem, some in Google, some in Azure, some in AWS. So this is the first external change in the environment. The second major change in the environment is that in the past, if we had 1,000 employees in the company, we probably had 20 employees doing remote access. Today, it is just the reverse. It is these two changes in the external market that we believe dictates that you relook at the way you have implemented secure access, secure remote access. And that is where this whole concept of zero trust comes in. It was in the year 2019, I think, that Amit seriously evaluated multiple technologies. And finally, he took a decision to go with AppGate. I'm not promoting AppGate here. I'm promoting the concept of zero trust. But the reason why we went with AppGate was primarily because of simplicity. Very simple to implement, very simple to manage, and it was very cost effective. So now with that rather long introduction, Jason, let me leave it to you and Rajesh and Amit to actually take this whole session forward and discuss with our viewers what this whole concept of zero trust is, why should you think of zero trust, and of course, implementation challenges and the post-implementation benefits. So Jason, over to you.
Great, thank you, Premchand. And thank you for the introduction. And that's the first time I've seen Winston Churchill woven into a zero trust presentation. So that's great. Thank you. So let's go ahead and dive in. I know we're really looking forward to this conversation here, and we are open to Q&A. So please feel free to use the Q&A widget to submit your questions. So we're going to start off and first do some basic introductions to the concept of zero trust. Then we'll talk about zero trust network access, and then we'll be able to share some case studies and approaches to this. So zero trust is a security strategy, a security model. And what it does is it allows us to shift away from the traditional security architectures that have gaps and shortcomings, and shift toward a much more dynamic model that assumes an organization has been breached, and it puts in place rules around what's called default deny. No individual, no identity, no device is going to be allowed to access anything else on the network unless it's been explicitly authenticated, explicitly validated. That is, it's untrusted by default until we validate it. When they validate it, an entity, then we enforce the principle of least privilege. That entity, whether it's a human or non-human, gets access to the minimum necessary set of resources in order to be productive. And part of all of this is comprehensive monitoring of the ongoing operations and security of the environment. And taken together, that allows organizations to have a much more effective approach to security. And Prem was talking about VPNs, and we know VPNs have many, many shortcomings. One of which is when an individual signs into a VPN, typically they have broad access to everything on the network. And we've seen, unfortunately, time and time again, attackers able to take advantage of that broad network access to perform network reconnaissance, to deploy malware or ransomware, and really have tremendously negative impacts on our organizations. So that's kind of defines zero trust. Let's very briefly talk about why this is the case and why we need this concept of zero trust. And the first is that our fundamental networking foundations of TCP/IP is not designed for security. In fact, it's designed for the opposite of security. It's designed to very easily allow devices on a network to connect to one another. And this shows up technically and from a process perspective where when you get on a TCP/IP network, that device can see everything else on the network, and it can establish a network connection to those. And only after that is there any sort of security put in place in terms of requiring authentication. And this is exactly the opposite of how we want our systems to be today. And we see that the downside of this when we have VPNs that are exposed to every malicious actor on the planet, and they take advantage of that. The second reason that traditional network security is a struggle for us to be successful with is that the notion of a policy language, a rule, is not built into TCP/IP. The only thing that our core networking has is the capability to basically say, should this source IP address here have access to that target IP address there? And IP addresses are not very meaningful. They're not something that we can have a useful conversation around. So traditional network firewalls require us to answer this question with an allow or a block or a yes or no. And that question is very difficult to answer in any way that is meaningful to the business, to our compliance team, or to the larger picture. So what happens is that our organizations kind of give up and they say, you know what, we're going to have a really wide, flat, fast, reliable network, and we're going to rely on someone else, someone outside the network team to enforce security at the authentication level or at the application level. And this has resulted in the poor security practices and the poor results that we see today with ransomware and data exfiltration happening around the world. So if we go to the next slide to talk about what zero trust brings. So what zero trust brings, if we go ahead and build it out, is it takes a proper approach to this. It flips this on its head and says, you know what? We're going to require authentication first. Now, we're talking about concepts here, not technology. We're going to require authentication before any sort of connection is allowed. And only after that authentication happens will we allow a given identity to see the smallest possible set of resources based on who we know they are and what we've modeled them to be allowed to see. This is exactly how you'd want it, so that we know who the individual is, we know exactly what they're allowed to access, we let them do that so they can be productive, but we don't allow them to access anything else. So that solves the first problem. And the next slide solves the second problem, which is zero trust gives us a very rich policy language. It allows us to ask the right kind of access questions, such as, should Jim have access to our SAP production server? Now, this is a really meaningful question because now we can have a useful conversation across the business and the compliance team and the security team and the application owners. Who's Jim? What role does Jim have in the organization? Let's talk about how we want to protect our SAP production server. This allows us to answer the question with the right answer, which is, it depends. and then have a policy model that builds into it exactly these types of attributes or criteria. Well, what project is Jim on? What time of day is it? Is Jim's machine patched? Those type of things are the very rich set of vocabulary that we need in our policies for a true zero trust model and for truly effective security. And what this allows us to do as an organization is now have policies that are tied to the broader set of processes in our organization. Now we can have access policies that are enforced at the network layer, but are tied to this context of people being in the right groups of our identity processes, of our device management, or things like that. And the general model here is built on a couple of concepts. So one is called the policy decision point, and that's the brain of the system that utilizes context and events from your enterprise systems, from your identity system, from your IT infrastructure, et cetera, to make decisions about whether a given user can access a given resource. And we really believe that zero trust should be about controlling access to all resources. You can see the wide variety of resources on the bottom there. This is called universal ZTNA. And access is enforced through these zero trust policy enforcement points, or PEPs. So you have the policy decision point, the brain of the system. It communicates those decisions down to the enforcement points, and then those enforcement points actually control access. And so this works really well because we have a centralized place to model our policies, and we have a distributed set of enforcement points. So no matter where the user is, and no matter what they're accessing, the policy can get enforced. Okay, so let's pause there, and I think that there's some of the other commenters on the panel want to chime in, and we'll begin our conversation.
Maybe Rajesh, you can now tell us as to what was your situation around that COVID time, which made you think in terms of changing your remote access. What were you thinking, and how did you actually go about it?
Yeah, I mean, I resonate with many of the points what Prem and Jason mentioned in the previous session. So primarily, we had a large group of organizations, right? It's a large group with multiple subsidiaries, and we had the same traditional architecture, like we have a multi-point VPN connectivity between the sites as well as to multiple data centers. And there were some local services, the subsidiaries, which also were used by the users during the normal working, right? And we had the ratio of, say, 20:80 in terms of remote users pre-COVID. And the COVID changed everything into shift this one to almost like, 80:20, right? 80 outside and 20 inside. So this has brought in few challenges, right? So when we enabled work from home, one of the major challenges we had faced was because of the current architecture. The architecture was well enough built for the office-based working, looking at various aspects, including the bandwidth consumptions, the speed of service delivery, and all those things. So we had a multi-point VPN where subsidiary users used to connect directly to subsidiaries and only come to the main data center for accessing the services which were in the data center, right? So when the VPN thing came in, it became important for the users to connect to the main data center, and then you need to take a hairpin to reach the services in the subsidiaries and go back, which also impacted performance, bandwidth challenges, and the cost in terms of the links and so on and so forth. We were actually exploring something which works similar like a multi-point VPN at the client level. So we researched on multiple, we approached many major vendors who are playing in giants in the network space. Nobody was able to give us a solution, other than connecting from one location and disconnecting from one location, connecting on another site to get the access, or you have this hairpinning architecture services, right? So we happen to, we are also in discussion at the same time with various SaaS SD-WAN vendors in terms of replacing since our tech refresh was coming soon, we are also talking to them in terms of what kind of technology we can replace or, refresh using. So we are in talk with multiple SD-WAN vendors, cloud-based as well as, the on-premise ways, SaaS and SD-WAN vendors. But we found that it becomes once it becomes cloud-based, the total cost of ownership is going to change because of the data plane and the control plane both travels to the cloud. Yeah, this was a challenge, and we thought, our dream for the multi-point VPN from the endpoint may be a dream. And I was researching on the internet, and when we stepped onto one of the Gartner papers on the ZTNA, and happened to see it as so called as SDP, software defined perimeter, right? And AppGate has been seen as one of the leaders in those areas. And I also happen to remember that at some point in time we had a discussion. Amit and I had a discussion sometime around in a previous engagement. He was mentioning about something about SDP. So I remembered about him. I called him up, and he said, "Yeah, we are the partner. Yeah, we are a partner with this AppGate. Okay, why don't we connect and explore?" So then I had a great team who gone above and beyond to evaluate those technologies. They were doing multiple POCs in parallel. We had Amit, to deploy the POCs on this one, and voila, we found this is quite interesting. What we dreamed we got, right? So we could solve the first problem, and we thought it would only about replacing the VPN with this for one, basically the multi-site access. Considering that we had around 2 data centers plus around 15 plus other subsidiary data centers, then we also had a workload on the clouds. Yeah, so we wanted to connect user from all these different places securely. And considering the COVID has also as the people shifted from the ratio in terms of 80-20, I think this might have this is what happened to most of the organizations across the world. And the attack the ratio on the VPN has increased drastically, and we were observing those in the market news and other threat intelligence. So we wanted to have a secure option in terms of replacing the VPN, and we moved it. We looked at doing a POC, and then that's where we started with this zero trust access evaluation, AppGate. I think we have some slides from Jason for some more, then we will continue the rest, and there's a lot to talk about.
Great, thank you, Rajesh. That's really helpful background and context, and thank you for sharing that part of your journey. So within Zero Trust, there's this concept of Zero Trust network access, which we really believe is the core and is the right starting point, because it addresses the gaps between what has traditionally been the biggest gap in security between the networking layer and the identity and the resource layer. And what Zero Trust network access does is it enforces the policies at a network layer. It makes it so that the network itself is inaccessible through that set of Zero Trust policy enforcement points that we mentioned. And it uses some very effective networking and cryptography to make this happen and to enable that very rich policy model that we talked about. So if we go to the next slide. What it does is it allows organizations to have and control access to these resources through a set of contextual policies, so that when the user's on the network, they're authenticating to the policy decision point through what's called the control plane. They're granted an access token, and that access token is then communicated to the policy enforcement points, which then set up these encrypted tunnels, this data plane. Each user gets a number of encrypted tunnels from their device through those policy enforcement points to the resources that they need access to. And what that allows them to do is avoid exactly the kind of hairpinning or inefficient network topologies that Rajesh mentioned, and to control 100% of their network traffic. And this is important because not everything is a web app. You've got users who have applications that are running on older TCP/IP protocols. You've got VoIP traffic, for example, that might be going over UDP. You've got system control processes that might have a system administrator or a patching server that needs to connect to a user's device. And you might have network administrators who have to use other network protocols like ICMP. So all of that is part of what we believe is required in an infrastructure here of universal Zero Trust network access that handles all network protocols and all users across their environments. I saw that we had a question come in, and I wanted to just touch on that real quick, which is around what happens if a user attempts to access something that's unauthorized. And that's a great question, because in the zero trust model, that's going to be that's going to be blocked. If I'm a user and I have access to 5 different web applications, and then maybe I or some malware in my device attempts to do a port scan, number one, it's going to be blocked. So there's no traction for the malware. But number two, it's going to be easily detected because it's been blocked. So it's going to be logged, and it allows the organization to have much clearer visibility into anomalous activity such as that, so that the security operations team or the SIM can detect this and immediately jump on it. So it helps improve the signal coming out of the usual noise of network activity. So to wrap up this section here, we talked about zero trust network access as being the heart of getting started with zero trust. And what that allows organizations to do is to deploy this overlay network on top of their legacy infrastructure. So whether you've got traditional firewalls, whether you've got mainframe or mini computer systems that are still running your core banking services, those things can be protected by a zero trust network access solution. It helps organizations move toward a much more modern enterprise network. And we've seen some very large, sophisticated organizations transform their networks to be based on this. It allows users to have a much better, more seamless experience moving toward modern passwordless or biometric authentication. And the policies that we mentioned also reduce your overhead because they are set and then they automatically adjust to user context. It really reduces the manual burden associated with configuring them.
Jason, I want to come in here.
Jason, 1 second.
Yeah, Mukund.
Jason, if you can just take a second and ask, there's a question from one Mr. Garcia on the trial of doing something which is not on his policy and on his access, a trial attack on access, how can it be managed? That's the question.
Yes, yeah. So I touched on that earlier, and I'll repeat the answer here. So if a user or some malicious software on the user's device tries to access something that they're not allowed to, because we're using a default deny model, the zero trust platform will block it. So they won't be able to attempt to access a database server or to do port scanning or network reconnaissance. So number one, it'll be blocked. And number two, it'll be immediately logged and made detectable. So because traffic is default deny, there's a lot less noise in the system, and it's easier for a security operations team or a SIM to detect those anomalies and then respond to them. So one last picture here around universal ZTNA. At AppGate, when we built this system, we really believed that the notion of universal zero trust is what's important, and put a lot of effort into making sure that both sides of this picture are very well built out. So the AppGate system is all about supporting all types of users and identities, whether they're employees, remote users, whether they're a third-party supplier that can only use a browser, whether they're a DevOps system that can only interact by APIs, whether they're IoT. All of those things are part of the AppGate SDP ecosystem and are first-class citizens in the policy model. Likewise, on the right-hand side, that access to the widest possible variety of resources is supported. So whether your organization is running in traditional on-premises hardware-based data centers, whether you're co-located, whether you've moved to private virtualized workloads, whether you're using serverless workloads like Kubernetes, whether you're running in public cloud, all of those things equally are first-class citizens in the policy model that AppGate SDP supports. And everything is built around this policy model that is fundamentally based on identities for ensuring that the identity is authenticated, that the policy or the principle of least privilege is enforced, that the system itself is very flexible and agile and can adapt, and that the infrastructure itself is protected through this use of cryptography to make sure that malicious actors can't even see the infrastructure. So taking that together, it's a very comprehensive result. And as Rajesh was telling you, there's a lot of benefits and value to be obtained by deploying it.
Great. I know we have a question and answer session, but I think this is an important question so that a lot of people can get clarity going forward. The question is, can you explain how AppGate will replace my traditional VPN on the firewall? Also, are there benefits of AppGate over the normal VPN?
Let's ask
Sure.
Rajesh to answer that. He is the user. He has done it.
Okay.
Yeah, AppGate actually replaces the VPN. So there is no use case of AppGate over the VPN, first and foremost, the second portion of the question. And the first portion of the question is, yes, you can decommission your VPN after once you have deployed AppGate, because it replaces your VPN solution. Is it that what your question was?
Yeah, I think
we will go through I'll cover it more detail in terms of our approach and how we rolled it out as we go to the next sections.
Right. And there's another question from Mr. Shrestha, but I think we will cover the questions at the Q&A session, right? And Mohammed, we will come back to you with the complete details on whatever you want about your question on the traditional VPN and the benefits over normal VPN. We'll definitely get back to you. We'll have our expert call you up. Is that okay? Let's move on.
Yeah. See, I think it's important to add at this stage that one of the important criteria that we had in mind when we were evaluating AppGate versus other alternatives was the fact that when we spoke to our customers, many of them told us that, yes, while we are moving to cloud applications, in the near term, and what they meant by near term, when I asked them, what do you mean by near term? They said the next 3 to 5 years. 70 to 80% of our assets will continue to be on-prem. Only 20% will be in the cloud. Therefore, what happened was customers were of the view that if they implement a zero trust network, the controller must be on-prem and not in the cloud. And AppGate was one of the solutions that had this very nicely with them. They said you can put the controller on-prem. And that was a very significant advantage. And Amit had used that in his extensive early evaluation. And I think Rajesh also went through with that.
Yeah.
And he, in fact, even moved from on-prem to cloud
yes,
at one stage.
Yeah, right. We started with hybrid and on-premise, and then we moved to the cloud. And definitely the advantages are a lot. We can walk you through those. Maybe some of those areas will be covered when I'll discuss. First and foremost is the policy engine. You know, the way it orchestrates. Those who have worked in NAC solutions and other things, we know that, you know, there are certain parameters which are checked, postures which are checked, and based on those access are allowed. The beauty of the solution here is actually it is first of all clock. It uses something called a single packet authorization, where based on the signed packet, it allows you to start getting access, or the gateway gets open for the services which you require. So you scan on the outside of the network, you don't get much in terms of like a VPN. You don't have any port exposed, any other services exposed. So the clocking is one of the important features in terms of securing it from the perimeter or from the outside. Yeah. Then it integrates with your identity access management solutions. A lot of benefits. I think we can go to the next slides. I can go through that. I have covered most of them. Then we can have anything more else we can discuss further in the question and answer session. Do we have
great? There is a poll question. If you guys can answer that, that will be a lot helpful. We can tweak our presentation and our conversation in going forward with you. If you can just answer the polls as well, that'd be great. Take a second, you can answer the polls and then we will move on. While they're filling the polls, can we just take one more question? There is another gentleman called Mr. Rodriguez. He asks, what happens when an attacker meets the policy criteria in ZTNA?
So if we think about what does it mean for an identity to be able to access something, there's a number of steps that have to happen. And that's by design, right? In order for an individual to get access, they need to be onboarded into the system. That means they need to have the client software installed. They need to have the key, the key for this specific organization configured on the device, and that's going to be transmitted to them in some secure method, usually using some sort of device management solution. And then that key allows them to actually connect to the infrastructure, and then they need to authenticate using the enterprise's identity provider in order to get access to something. So we've never seen a situation where an attacker is able to bootstrap and do that, because there are so many steps required and so many factors that are required. Even if they were able to do that, there's going to be additional criteria that are typically associated with the policy, such as geographic location, device posture checks, such as, is this a corporate managed device? All of those things are very much designed to protect an unauthorized attacker from getting in. Now, there are, of course, no security solution is perfect. You can imagine a situation where maybe you have a lost or a stolen laptop, or you have probably a laptop which has some malware on it. That's the most likely scenario. And in that case, that laptop with malware on it, of course, can access the same things the user is accessing, because the user is sitting there. But what universal ZTNA, what the policy does, is it restricts access to anything else on the network, and that's called reducing the blast radius. So if I click on a bogus link, I get malware in my device. That's a bad day for me. My device is compromised. The attacker on my device can access and see what I'm doing, but they can't access anything else on the network, so that the blast radius of this attack is limited. My device has to be destroyed. I get a new one. Not a good day for me, but that attacker can't go and perform network reconnaissance and move laterally and take down the whole organization.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So, Mukund, we're moving to the next.
You can all put in your questions in the Q&A session, Q&A tab that is present below, and we'll be more than happy to answer them. And if you would want some more information, we can do that after the call, and we'll give you all our contact details as well.
Great. So moving on, we're looking at practical consideration of zero trust implementation, and to get into that, let's hear from Mr. Rajesh itself, because he has done all those evaluation to get zero trust implemented for him, right? So, sir, you'd like to add some point over here?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the identity and access management is one aspect, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have an identity and access management solution like, say, for example, SailPoint or so on and so forth. Because the zero trust works closely on the identity, right? It is identity centric, and it's also about probably giving the access to applications or services based on the context of the device, context of the user, context of what authorizations or access they have, right? So even Gartner defines the zero trust in that perspective, right? It's based on identity-based, contextual, policy-based access to the applications, or the boundary created around the applications to give access to the end user. So identity and access management is required while doing the implementation, but most of the organizations will have an Active Directory and the security groups, which is good enough to start with. As well as definitely the other aspects is probably collecting the services and ports in terms of what you wanted to configure and what you need to allow the access to.
Right. So adding to that context, organizations should be prepared, like what kind of policies they like to create, right? Who should have access, in what condition they should have access, what are the applications they need to have access, if they're coming inside office, if they're coming, from the BOD device or a corporate device. All those is the requirement which can be clubbed together and can be created as a policy set, right? Which can be very dynamic in nature, right? So the same policy will work differently if your user is trying to access a corporate device or being in office, and the same device, if it's out of perimeter, now the access is totally dynamic and it changes based on the context of the device and the user, right? So this is how the policy and the compliance requirement can be put through. And also, as it
Amit, I have a question here.
Yeah.
So for a large company like what Rajesh was involved with, where you have around 2,000 users, you have SAP as your primary application, and you have users, let's say 80% coming remotely.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, how many use cases are there in this whole policy engine, and how much time does it take?
So if we think of the organization side having about 40, 50 odd applications, 2,000 plus kind of users and things like that, a typical deployment will not take more than 15 to 20 days of time. yes, there is a prerequisite part of it. Mr. Rajesh has clearly mentioned that identity is one of the very key pillar of the zero trust access, zero trust network access. That is something that we should really consider before getting into that, right? Or it should be clear how should we approach the identity over here. The policy requirement is something that should be well prepared, and if those things are aligned, it's hardly 15 to 20 days of work to get relevant access and start rolling out in parallel to the test users and going to the full-fledged deployment.
Okay.
So continue to the last point, the technology integration. Now it gives a lot more flexibility to integrate with different control points where you can ingest data from the other security stacks that was mentioned earlier by Jason. Also, we can do a security integration with a lot more existing solutions, right? It could be a SIEM solution, it could be EDR solution, it could be encryption solution, things on those areas that can be integrated, and that those values can be leveraged to get access, right? It's not only dependent on the central policies. There is other security factor that can be ingested, which will give you much more control to access, and that is real time, right? A typical example could be that you're integrating with the EDR pointers, and in the real time information, you're allowing someone to get access to the relevant application, or it can be denied as well, right? So that is the way it's going to happen, and this is the practical consideration before we get into the deployment side of it. Moving next,
Amit.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And that's okay, Pramod.
Okay, there are a lot more questions. Should we take that up, or would you want to complete your point and go ahead? So the next question from Mohammed again is, can we redirect the office internet public IP through the tunnel?
Absolutely, yes. You can do that in a different architecture way. You can have all your traffic, specific to the application, come to one area, and rest all internet traffic can be forwarded to another site, another gateway through which we can cater all the requirement. Yes, it can be done.
Right. And the next one is your favorite question, Rajesh. It says, it's from Santan Rodriguez. It says, please provide use cases for ZTNA. Thank you, Rodriguez. This question will make Amit very happy.
Yeah, the use cases for ZTNA can be starting from replacing your VPN users on a secure access. If you wanted to have multi-DC, multi-cloud access requirements, a better user experience in terms of accessing it from laptop as well as mobile devices, reduce your attack surface in terms of how much is exposed outside today in the published applications for certain things like mobile applications and other stuff. We expose the gateways. So I mean, it's a long list. I mean, a lot of use cases. So it all depends on your organization, where you are standing today. Even if it is just a replacement of VPN users, it is still quite a good investment in terms of the consequences of not doing it. Because I just came out of another ransomware attack and recovery from another organization. Again, the culprit is a VPN. So yes, VPN was a good technology. It did serve its purpose. It served for a long time, but I think it is time to look at look at the current posture of it and see how efficiently it is configured as well. If you are going to use it continuously and enabling multi-factors and other aspects, definitely. But at the same time, look at such technologies to reduce the complexity. Security become more efficient as it become more simple. That is one of the design principles of security. We might have inherited a lot of technologies over a period of time in terms of securing certain things, but then sometimes it is good to have a pause and look at and see how we can simplify and remove the clutter.
Great.
Just to add on to that, to answer this question on the use case, we have a use case library with us. We will discuss that with you so that you can tick from there what you really want. If you want to add some more to that, you can add. Apart from that, we will have a clear understanding. Both of us will be on the same page in terms of how your current identity management works, how your Active Directory is organized, where your users are coming from. And then based on that, the architecture will be drawn out and discussed with you so that you know exactly how things will work post-implementation. And I think, Rajesh, one of the things that you could tell us is that post-implementation, management by you as a user, was that a challenge? Was there anything, was it requiring heavy support from Amit and his team?
So I mean, for us, it is actually pretty easy to learn because we had engineers who already worked on NAC and other solutions, but it is not that complex to be say, even you don't need to know that. It is pretty, GUI based configurations. There's no CLIs, which I'm not a fan of. And it is simple to configure, manage. And the most important part was that we were able to delegate the access control, right, in terms of provisioning and deprovisioning to the system administration or the application administrators, because you don't require anymore to conduct a network team to provision or deprovision the access, other than unless it is a new application which is going to come into your environment and you want to configure it one time to set up the policy. Once it is done, it's all based on the security groups, membership, and it is managed by the application. So see how much simplified it become in terms of operations, how much time maybe we will be saving in terms of getting in touch with those people, getting those provisioning and stuff. So provisioning time itself is reduced. And as a user lifecycle, when it is managed, these are all managed at one level. So the access is provisioned, the remote access or the internal access is given, as well as it is deprovisioned as the user gets logged and those kind of things. So it is pretty optimized, and I would say a lot of operational benefits in that perspective.
Great. Okay, so there are about 6 more questions, so we will need to be a little brief and crisp.
Yeah.
The next question is, copying files through access can introduce risks of malware propagation such as RDP. How do we mitigate this risk? That's one question.
So I'll take an answer at that. So of course, security, information security is always a number of layers. And what we believe is that by providing universal zero trust network access, what that means is that regardless of where the user is, the same set of policies apply. So if you think about traditional network security, you have a completely different technology stack if the user is in the office versus if they're remote. And that poses a lot of challenges to enforce consistent security for enterprises. So what universal ZTNA does is it says, no matter where the user is, the same access policies apply. And then that allows you to layer on other components consistently. So you might have a data loss prevention solution that can do the file scanning, but because it operates the same, regardless of whether the user is on premises or remote, you can have one very effective DLP solution instead of trying to secure things separately if a user is remote or on premises. So at AppGate, the solution is around providing the best possible zero trust network access solution and enabling you to take advantage of other layers on top of that, such as DLP, in the most effective way possible.
Great. So the next question is, how do you differentiate between Cato networks and Aruba SSE?
I'll answer that very quickly, and then we'll move on. So in zero trust, you have to understand there's two general architectures. So the first architecture, which is what AppGate provides, is called direct routed, and this is what Premchand was mentioning, where AppGate provides customers with complete control of how and where the network traffic lies. So if you want to keep everything in country, you can deploy the policy decision point or what's called the controller in your environment. You can make sure that all that traffic stays in your environment or your country or your region. The other architecture, which is followed by some of those vendors that you mentioned, as well as others, is what's called cloud routed. And in those cases, user traffic goes from their device into the vendor's cloud and through the vendor's cloud and then into your private environment. So that traffic could go outside of your region. It certainly goes outside of your control. And that is often undesirable for many organizations. So that's one of the biggest differentiators between what AppGate provides and what other providers have.
Great. Okay, this is an interesting question. I think Rajesh should be able to answer this well. It says, the question is from Amin Ahsan. How do I convince my management that a solution like ZTNA is better than a traditional VPN client? The person is also asked, please talk technical. That's the request from the same questioner.
Yeah, I think first of all, technical doesn't talks with the management, that you need to be cautious about it. Primarily, what we need to understand is basically the attack risk on this VPN technology is increasing. That is, there are certain market research and papers and threat intelligence you can definitely collect as a supporting details for the attack, the attack ratios or statistics. Secondly, as I said, it's number one is security. In terms of number two, what value it brings other than that security, which is tangible to the business. Say, for a better user experience, reduced attack surface. These kind of things can bring additional value in terms of probably giving time for your team as well to optimize the operation. So when you say that you have more exposed applications outside, then the turnaround time to patch, maintain those things are higher, right? So when you look at so the design principles, which you can see in the slide as well, what we have performed is basically we were looking at agility in terms of not only the IT agility in terms of operations, but also in terms of business agility in terms of onboarding. Because when you are going through the mergers, acquisitions, you may inherit a lot of companies with different technologies used. So how you can be agile to kind of fast onboard them securely, where you don't have to fix all the security requirements at those organizations. So there are various aspects you need to consider it and look at your business in terms of what are the current state, and then from that you need to derive what are the drivers that is going to support you in terms of explaining to the management in terms of getting a buy-in. Definitely the security risk is very high. That is going to be the one and most important part, but at the same time you can find other tangible benefits. In our organization, we have done a lot of achievements out of it, even though we started as a remote VPN replacement, but my future slides will show you what all we achieved on top of it. Can we go to the slides, previous slides? I think it will be better to go through the slides and then we have further questions. So we cover most of the things in the slides or the discussions what we are going to have.
Maybe you must jump to the benefits slide.
Yeah. So approach solution, and then
we don't have much time.
Yeah. Okay.
Not much time, and all the people who have asked questions, we will be happy to extend this conversation by a minute or two so that no question goes unanswered. That's our promise, that we will let no question go unanswered. So please hold on and do wait. We have some more slides that we will probably answer your questions. Let's move on.
Yeah. So, we covered a portion of the challenges in the earlier things like post-COVID, the shift of the users, as well as challenges, as well as the other venues of opportunities where we were evaluating SDN or SASE solutions, right? And also we had the hairpin issue in terms of the bandwidth challenges and so on and so forth. So the approach to this was definitely we were evaluating various SD-WAN SASE solutions, and we have seen multiple solutions, which is cloud routed as well as direct routed in terms of AppGate as one at that point in time. Maybe now there are maybe more, but at that point in time, AppGate was only one which was probably offering that. And considering that we are on a hybrid and we are going to remain for hybrid for a couple of years more, and we wanted to make sure that also it's a future proof, right? It supports the cloud deployment. So we understood that the AppGate supports AppGate supports other the cloud providers, including marketplace deployments like AWS, Azure, and various others. You can move to the next slide, Mukund.
Next one we have got on the architecture side.
Yeah. So this is, this is like any other traditional organization. This was kind of high-level architecture. It looks like there was multiple DCs, multiple branch offices, and there are services at the branch offices. And we had also a public cloud service, which were connected over multi-point VPNs. Definitely. So there was, hub to spoke and spoke to spoke communication enabled. Users are able to access services, the DC from all the branch offices and the sub branches of them, as well as they were able to access the branch office services from the directly by having the point-to-point VPN from the subsidiary offices to the subsidiary head office. Yeah. So this was a kind of architecture, just like any other multi-point VPN solution works. And there was interconnectivity between the DCs, definitely for the DR replication and stuff like that. We had integrations with cloud in terms of certain applications, backend integrations, so which had another connectivity between the cloud. And also we had developers and third party who logs into the environment for definitely to support the DevOps or the development aspects of it, supporting the applications. So we had the end users as well as the contractors per se accessing those services from outside the network. And post ZTNA implementation, what happened is, so we as I said, we started by replacing the remote users requirement, right? We wanted to replace the VPN users with ZTNA. So we delayed the SD-WAN project for another year, thinking that, okay, because we've seen after seeing the demo and POC with the Amit, and we have thrown a lot of use cases around that, and Amit was able to kind of show us that it works. Yeah. So we said, okay, I mean, it almost does everything. And my 95 to 96% is application, which I'm going to serve from the DCs and the data center. So why do I still require a WAN? And why not I use the same inside the office and outside the office, right? So we did some experimentation, innovation with the support of the team. We brought down a couple of WANs on a very planned and with the agreement with those business units, and we tested it, and it worked beautifully without WAN connectivity. And we got an opportunity to change it, and then we have planned it well, and then we have replaced. We have enabled it for users to access from inside and outside the office, and we brought down all the WAN down, and we avoided investing on SD-WAN solution. Today, maybe one of the organizations who is using completely on ZTNA inside and outside the office, and the offices have been transformed to a cafe-like network. So you have pure internet, and definitely there are other things like Wi-Fi access controls and stuff like guest VLAN and BYOD VLAN and other things. But then, once you inside the office, you get print services and local services. That's it, and rest everything sits in the data center, and you have the same level of security outside the office, inside the office, and even offices. The operations has came down drastically in terms of network because you are just having internet connection. We moved ISP managed routers at the around close to 100 locations. So eliminating all those operational overheads, renewals, what not to say. So it is pretty simplified. So the value of this is it's up to your imagination in terms of how you can architect the organization, and also look at what services you run on the network. There may be use cases still with OT and inter-branch connectivities. I personally feel that SD-WAN is required only in case if you want to steer the traffic, something like heavy contents or medias or so and so forth. So the benefits, the results, we have increased agility, quicker provisioning of users, quicker onboarding of users or new businesses. It's all what is required is integrating their entity with your controller. And once you have the entity integrated, you get access defined at the security groups, and you get access for specific services what you want. Better consolidation. We removed certain things like NAC. So there was some posturing solutions used before in terms of MDM and stuff. Now the MDM concepts have changed drastically to the EPM endpoint management, but then earlier days we used to use NAC and MDM to kind of check the posture and allow the devices. So with the AppGate, you don't require that anymore. We removed the NAC on that perspective. We have decommissioned. We don't use MDM. We use AppGate directly to have the posture verified, and then allow access to the custom services which is specifically required. So reduce a lot of operational overheads, which in turn gives you cost benefit, because you probably don't need to expand your team, and your team can focus more on more important tasks and other things. Same level of security anywhere is, you work as a nomad worker type, or being in office, outside the office, everywhere you get the same level of security, and all the offices move to a cafe model network. So this is what we have achieved there. Definitely, the solution is integrated with the hybrid identity, MFA verification before. So what happens is when a user, first of all, as Jason was mentioning, you require a client to be installed, you require a profile to be installed, first of all, to even connect to a controller. Once you connect to the controller, you will be authenticated using your ID, MFA, those things. Then you're still not connected. Once you get authenticated, then you check your device for the posture. Like, you can check various mechanisms, like maybe, what kind of the specific security agent is not disabled or installed, and so on and so forth. And with that, it's still, once you have those posture verified, and whether your location is matching where it is allowed to work, time zones, all different parameters you can configure based on your business requirement. And then eventually it allows you to connect to specific service. That is the most important thing, on a specific micro tunnel. So it creates a micro segmentation or micro tunneling from the client. And if, say, for example, I have Oracle application, I have SAP application, or maybe I have an AD port to be accessed, all will be accessed on a separate multiple tunnels, reduces cross kind of exploitations and those kind of things. So if you have only SAP, you get only SAP, nothing else. You don't see anything else on the other side. You get just one tunnel allowing you to the applications, right? So the beauty of that is you have a micro segmentation at the client level, connecting to that micro tunneling, connecting to the tunnel. So as well as continuous posture check. Okay, I was good at when I logged in, but after some time I disabled my, say, for example, security antivirus or EDR, right? You lose access because it dynamically checks in terms of maintaining your posture, and it does revoke your access if you're doing. I heard that also Upgate has started integrating with EDR technologies like CrowdStrike, which can take decisions again based on further in terms of evaluating whether there is a malicious payload or there is a detection on the machine. I think so. Maybe Jason can comment on that. So overall, centralized policy engine, quick onboarding of new acquisitions, unified and better user experience. User can have the same kind of access on laptops in terms of Windows, Mac, the mobile devices, iOS, Android, everything. You have the same similar client. You see where you are connected to. You have even a beautiful thing like, there are web applications which probably many of us use, like SharePoint and other things, which may be, any kind of portals inside. You don't need to publish it anymore. You just access. You have shortcuts which can be created on the same client. You click on that. You don't need to even remember the URLs. The user experience wise, it is like kind of works like an always on VPN. However, it is continuously verified for your trust of your device, user, and other access, other criteria to make sure you get the connection every time you click. So I think I covered pretty much on that side. Anything else I missed, Amit?
That looks perfectly well explained. So that covers almost all the area in terms of the benefit. And I think with that note, we have the last slide, which talks about Paramount approach to embarking Zero Trust journey. As a Paramount, as a team, we help customer to plan, right? Collate with them, analyze what is really required and all, report all the things, and then we get into the Zero Trust implementation. It's a journey, as rightly started with the point that it's a journey, right? It's not just one product and we're just deploying it without being anywhere beginning or ending, right? We have to have a proper way to make sure we are able to configure and manage everything as per the requirement. So this is the approach that we follow. And at the end, what we do is there's a cost reduction, better security. That is the main focus here. And we wanted to achieve Zero Trust network access, not only for the outside world, even though if your users are inside the network, we want to have same level of security, right? So this is what we are able to help customer. And from this is where we are implementing this Zero Trust journey for the customer environment. With that note, I think we are done, Mukund. If you have anything to add in, please.
No, we are not done at all. We have some fantastic questions, and there are at least around 15 questions. And I think this is a great webinar because a good webinar is directly proportional to the amount of questions and the curiosity it raises. We are 8 minutes beyond the webinar, but still there are about 95 to 100 people on the webinar. So this is great. So I'm just going to quickly take up all the questions and we will answer one. So what are the, how do we create policy to accept and deny access? And are all of these vendor dependent?
So the policies are, I would say the best and most effective policies are ones that the security team develops in conjunction with people on the side, on the business. So the application owners or the data owners. And that's really where you want to get to, is you as a security professional want to be an enabler and collaborator with the people who actually should be making the decisions. The application owners, the data owners, the people who are responsible for the business processes. They know their users and they know best who should be accessing what. So it's around having a set of identity attributes and this infrastructure that lets those people define those policies, because ultimately they're going to be accountable for who is accessing those resources. So it's about encouraging collaboration between security and the business, which is going to be helpful in many ways.
Great. Does AppGate replace the NAC solution and the MDM solution? Do they perform the same functions?
I don't know, Rajesh, you want to talk about your experience there briefly?
Yeah. So I mean, they are different solutions, right? Different purposes, but AppGate have most of those capabilities integrated within the AppGate solution. For example, in terms of controlling the network access, you don't require anymore, because as I said, like it all depends on your architecture, right? The NAC is always to have the network access control inside the organization, right? So for us, as we move towards a flat network in terms of an internet cafe kind of network, right, where you have only internet access, we didn't see much purpose for that anymore. And in terms of the service access, even if you're connected to my network, what you all get is internet. And if the moment you connect app gateway, you get access to any services, and that also to specific ports and services, right? So again, you don't require the reason to segregate you and put you in different network for the purpose of restricting access to the services at the data center, right? So that's where we have eliminated the NAC. It all depends on your architecture and how you are planning to deploy it. MDM, yes, MDM as just for a posture checking, I don't think you require it anymore, because it does that. I mean, end of the day, it's a contextualized access, what any zero trust network access solution will provide, and AppGate does provide that in terms of verifying certain parameters in terms of what is required to give an access to a device, or identifying an access as an authorized device to connect to your network.
Great.
Jason,
okay, so I'm just combining two
questions.
Sorry.
No, I was asking Jason if you have any comment on top of it, or
no, that was great, Rajesh. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just combining two questions. When a device gets stolen, what measures can we take when AppGate is set as always on? One. And the second question is similar to CrowdStrike EDR integration, any immediate plans to integrate it with Defender?
So the in terms of the roadmap, I would say connect with the partner team here, and we can go through a roadmap for you in terms of the types of adapters and the risk scores that can be incorporated into the AppGate STP solution, because there's some great stuff coming there. In terms of an always-on solution and a stolen device, the idea behind that is what always-on is really intended for is basic connectivity, some core services. And traditionally it's used for when organizations have, let's say, on-premises Active Directory or authentication provider. In all cases, the lost or stolen device needs to be part of a risk model where you think about, okay, if this is always on, in theory, an attacker has access to the things that it's connected to, but clearly there's going to need to be multiple defenses around that, such as the authentication into the device itself is going to be protected by passwords or biometric, and the addition of MFA when, let's say, there's a session timeout. Those things can be layered on top that can add to defenses there. But I think that's a worthwhile conversation to talk about the specifics for your organization.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
does AppGate eliminate ISP links that we have on branches? If it does not, help in any cost savings on these links?
No, AppGate doesn't eliminate the ISP links in the branches, as well as you require internet basically to access this one. But definitely you can eliminate WANs, WAN routers. I mean, ISPs, sometimes ISPs provides routers and firewalls that, as part of the service. So you need an internet connection at the end of the day to connect back, right? So it cannot eliminate an ISP service, but you can Probably at the data center level, you can look at reducing your lease lines, definitely, because you have the option to have multiple gateways deployed and connected to multiple links on the ADSL kind of links which can be utilized. So you don't require to have the high bandwidth, high cost lease lines. Probably correct, Amit. I think if I'm right, I mean we're one who did it.
That's right. So we don't have to depend on the backend connectivity, which takes too much of your cost in MPLS or kind of a VPN solution by the ISPs, right? Those kind of dependency, or even though the lease lines and all is not typically required, because it's not bound towards, you should have a static IP, you should be having this bandwidth and all, because you're giving very granular access, right? And the performance really improves in that area as well, right? So this eliminates the unnecessary too much cost, and you can lower down your cost as per the architecture, right? So you're not dependent on those kind of connectivity. So definitely.
Yeah, you require a fixed IP definitely to connect, but at the end of the day, nowadays I think many of the ISPs provides here something called DI, where you get a fixed IP on a ADSL link. So you don't require to have a lease line for that, as far as you have you're eligible for that kind of subscriptions, and then you also save tons of money on that.
Jason wants to leave.
As we promised, we will leave no question unanswered, but Jason needs to go. A few of us will be there, and Jason wanted to express his thought or two for a moment and thank.
Great,
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, thank you. No, I really appreciate the opportunity and the conversation, and it's so exciting to see all of these questions. So the team at Paramount and here at Appgate will follow up with all of you, and we're looking forward to engaging. So from Chand and team, thank you. We love talking about Zero Trust, and we're really excited about the opportunity to share the solutions and help your organizations achieve this value. So thank you very much, and I apologize with I'm being very pressed for time here.
Thank you very much, Jason. Thank you for your presence and all your
But
inputs.
we will finish all the questions. I think there are a few more left. So do stay on the rest of them. We will finish this. I think we will probably take up the next question. The next question is, if there is given that ZTNA relies on centralized policy management, what happens when connectivity to a remote location is interrupted and the authentication mechanism becomes unavailable?
All right. So let me handle this question. So it's the hybrid setup, right? You can have your central policy point deployed wherever you like to, because not dependent on any kind of particular setup, right? You can have a brain or a controller deployed wherever you like. You can deploy in one data center, two data center. You can have one on-prem. You can have one cloud. You can also do one in one cloud, and second one is another cloud as well. So that level of flexibility is available. So it's not dependent on one, controller which does the authentication authorization. You can fall back to whichever is available and nearest to the user can be done in that way, actually.
Great. So say if there is NAC for posture checks, VPN access and PAM to access specific resources while being connected to the VPN, which should limit or have granular connectivity towards specific issues?
Okay. So to answer this question, let's think of a policy. We are saying like, who like to access this application that can be very granular. I can say this is the user working from this office or this device or this location. It will be 10 different contexts about identity. We can also do a context about the compliance requirement, right? We wanted to make sure the device user is connecting from is a corporate device, is a patch compliant, is EDR compliant, right? Or MAC address, whatever you like to have any context about device can be put in together. And then you give only that specific access based on the maybe some other context. Maybe take an example for a specific window or based on the ITSM ticket, right? All those can be combined, which gives a very, very, very granular access for a user towards that particular application. So that really eliminates the need of NAC, because NACs are wonderful, used to be wonderful when you are in central place. But as the users are moving around, they are coming from different device, and managing, implementing NAC is not that easy job at all, right? And you are getting the same level of control and visibility if someone is trying to access your application. So this is how we do in the
Fantastic. Okay, in line with the device stolen point, it's a continuation. Can we keep Appgate on an always on mode for services like patch management, where IT services needs reachability to devices when utilizing on-prem? but user-based requests like file shares, other apps be kept on demand access from MFA?
Absolutely. The wonderful question, first of all. Yes, you always have an option to step up authentication based on the requirement, right? You can say, as long the corporate device and the right user is in office network, I don't need to follow the MFA. But moment you move out of the office, for any kind of critical application, I like to do, the step up authentication. Maybe MFA you like to check, maybe compliance you like to check, maybe geolocation you like to check, right? These kind of boundaries and fencings can be put across so that even though a device is moving out of your office, it's not in a bad hand at all.
Okay. Once all the user endpoints come via ZTNA client, does LAN needs to be secure? Does having a PSK authorization for corporate network be wise?
Okay, it's a good question. Right. So as we have AppGate, which is a fully end-to-end tunnel. So what is happening is, even though you're in a LAN or an outside office network connecting to ZTNA from AppGate, what will happen is from user to the ZTNA environment, it's completely encrypted tunnel, right? So there's a right cryptography, there's a tokenization happening in between the device and the ZTNA every time you log in. It's not like a static, it keeps on changing every time you log into the system. So it's full end-to-end encryption. So even though if you're running a clear text application from user to backend, AppGate helps you to secure that. Your HTTP or telnet will be encrypted from the client to ZTNA environment for sure, right? From that point, it will lead to a backend. So it really handles that authentication part and the cryptography part. So there's nothing required in the LAN, securing LAN more. And as Rajesh had mentioned this example, we have like a coffee kind of a store, right? Where you go, you set up your laptop, what you have access? You have access only to the internet. And from there, you're hopping to ZTNA to access your resource. You be outside, you be inside, that is the architecture we follow, right? So yeah.
Yeah, only reason if you wanted to have a segmentation at network LAN is only because if you wanted to segregate between your guest and your internal users, because you bring in guest users, they will be connected to the same network, and you don't want them to infect your machines or something like that. That's the only reason, because since they're on the same LAN, those kind of segmentations you can probably do it, and that you can do it pretty much with a Wi-Fi solution who supports that. Yeah, a centralized Wi-Fi solution that supports that.
Yeah, and even the AppGate also in this scenario can be always on. So the moment you are always on, you are not allowing anything to go in or out of to your endpoint, even though in the same Wi-Fi as well.
Yeah, right. I remember
that can be architected in that design as well. Yep.
And always on doesn't mean that you are not going to re-authenticate. You can set your re-authentication time like 8 hours, 16 hours, based on this one. So it will re-authenticate at some point in time. It's not like you can, indefinite. You can set it probably, but I don't know. We kept it for comfortable hours in terms of the re-authentication part. So you can set it up based on that. So it's not necessarily that every time it's really always on forever.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure all the other.
Thanks a lot, everybody, and for all the people who stayed back despite us going overboard by 20 minutes on the time. We will be sending you the recorded session of this conversation. Plus, we will also be sending you an email where you have all our contacts, and you can get in touch with us. Yes. What I'm also going to do is we will drop in all of our email IDs so that you can talk to us if you have any need or some more discussions or some more details from us. We will drop in the chat so that we can continue this conversation in more detail and in more depth. Just give me a second. I will just drop the email IDs to everybody on the chat. Can I request? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying that it doesn't lose anything. Get in touch with the Paramount team. They can arrange you a demo. You can see in by demo environment what we want to see. Definitely how the policy is, how difficult it is, or how easy it is. And there's nothing in loss to do a POC if you're serious about exploring this. So they can also support you on that. I mean, you're in safe hands in terms of Paramount, definitely on that perspective.
Thank you,
So on my
everybody.
behalf,
Prem.
thank you, everybody.
Rajesh. Yeah, it's been a
Thank
great
you for
session with
attending.
a lot of interesting questions. We will keep in touch. Do visit us at paramountashore.com. You will have end-to-end cybersecurity services with a lot of case studies in it. Do visit us. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.